Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Adam White and Tom Scholes. Week 2 of European action saw a mixed bag for French sides, but at least there were a few bridges built where they needed to be, at least. But before we get on that and a look ahead at the Ligue 1 weekend, here's the news. Monaco have put themselves in a spot of bother in Group G as they lost 3-0 to Porto on Tuesday night at home. 2 goals from Vincent Aboubakar put the Monegasque to the sword, who now sit joint bottom of the group with RB Leipzig on a single point. Paris Saint-Germain saw both to Bayern Munich and Carlo Ancelotti's reign at the club by winning 3-0 at the Parc des Princes, laying down a marker for the rest of Europe. In the Europa League, Marseille suffered a shock defeat away to Red Bull Salzburg after Mounas Dabour scored with 15 minutes remaining. Nice continued their strong start to their Europa League campaign with a 3-0 win at home to Vitesse. Alassane Player scored a brace, while Alain Saint-Maximin scored a quite brilliant goal to round up proceedings. And finally, just as we came on air, Lyon drew 1-1 with Atalanta at home. Bertrand Traoré scored just on the brink of half-time, but Pau Gomez's free kick saw the Italians take a point. That's the news, but remember, for all the latest, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. Let's start this week with that win in the capital for PSG over Bayern Munich. And Adam, was this result a statement to the rest of Europe?
Yes, I think it has to be. Obviously, Bayern Munich are not necessarily the force they were, and the side that they ended up putting out last night for various reasons, injuries and rotation, and Ancelotti not being too happy with 1 or 2 players, meant that they weren't as full strength as perhaps you might have thought going into the game. But nevertheless, they're still Bayern Munich, and the way PSG have performed against bigger teams in the Champions League, perhaps less so in the group stages, of course, but in general they've been pretty flaky, and they've been pretty easily got at in those sort of games on the whole. So it was really good to see them not necessarily dominate, but I felt like they were always at least in control of proceedings. It never really felt like they were under too much pressure, although Bayern had a lot of the ball in the first half. Obviously, by that point, PSG were already ahead through Dani Alves. So I think that it shows that with the additions of Neymar and Mbappe, and PSG are a real force to be reckoned with going into the later stages of competition. I think I mentioned him before, but the addition of Dani Alves is perhaps underrated. I think he's a real warrior, the type of player that PSG have lacked in previous campaigns when they've been sort of emotionally frail and they've been got at and they've collapsed, as we've seen perhaps repeatedly from them. And it looks like that's going to be less likely this season. So I think the fact that they were able to pressure Bayern into mistakes and can continue to keep the pressure on and win comfortably, which is something they haven't really done against sides of supposedly a similar quality, is a huge statement for them. And it says that come the quarter semi-finals of the Champions League, PSG are going to be in with a real shout of winning this competition. So great result, great performance overall, relatively simple in the end, especially after the second goal went in. And Mbappe was fantastic. And it was a huge statement from PSG, and they'll be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, Adams briefly mentioned the man that was probably the star on the evening, and he loves the Champions League, it seems, Tom. And Kylian Mbappe, we all know how good he is, but he loves this kind of occasion, doesn't he?
He's a wonderful player. Every generation, there's a young player that comes through, and 10 years ago or longer, it was Messi and Ronaldo, and everybody looked and just went, these two, especially Messi, they've got something about them. I think this generation, we've got Mbappe, and every time he plays in the Champions League, and every time the spotlight is on him, and every time there is pressure on him to perform, he looks as relaxed as ever, and he delivers even more than I think people expected, because everybody now knows how good he is. The age factor's gone out the window. He's younger, than me. And that, on one hand, that makes me feel quite, poor about myself. But on the other, it just shows how young he is. But no one ever No one ever seems to mention it anymore. When he was first emerging, oh, this 18-year-old wonder kid, but now people are genuinely considering him as one of the top players in world football. And I think that's testament to how well he's done. And every now and again, he comes through and he puts in a performance like he does last night, and he impresses everybody, and everybody goes away saying how good he is and how far can he reach? What's his ceiling? I don't think he's got one yet.
And in all honesty, it's got a lot of people talking whether Neymar has stepped out of one shadow to jump into another one at the moment because of a player like that. But it was nice to see Cavani and Neymar kind of strangely and maybe mildly awkwardly make up every so often and have a little bit of a hug. And now again, at least things seem a little bit more calmer on planet PSG. And what a result to do, even though Bayern Munich obviously had problems, as evident by Ancelotti sacking earlier today. But a great result nonetheless. Let's talk about the result that didn't quite go as Ligue fans would have liked to see, and that's the somewhat of a surprise that happened in Monaco as Porto ran out comfortable winners in the end. Tom, was this result worrying for Jardim? And there were some defensive lapses. They seem to be caught pretty easily by the Portuguese side. Is that a worry?
See, the thing is, I'm caught in two minds with this because on one hand, you look and go, a 3-0 defeat at home in the Champions League usually spells, that something's got to be done. Not necessarily panic stations just yet, but alarm bells will be ringing. However, I think you've got to take some of this Monaco team's performance, especially in a competition like this, with a bit of pinch of salt because they are quite a young team still. They've lost a lot of players, yes, but they brought in a lot of other players. They're good players, but they've got to have time to gel at this level. Porto as well, they're not exactly an Apoel Nicosia or a CSKA Moscow. They're a team that are going to go for you. And sometimes with Portuguese teams, you never know what you're going to get. I think they put in a good performance against Monaco. And normally I would look at the performance of Monaco and go, oh, that's a bit dodgy. I think you've got to look at something like that. But however, take it with a pinch of salt and move on and work on it and try and make sure it doesn't happen again and make sure it's just a blip as opposed to a recurring thing.
I'm a little bit worried on this one because I always think that in the Champions League and any European competition, really, win all your home games and you're probably home and dry, and losing one can be pretty detrimental. And there was a lot of worries. Glick got caught up on a couple of occasions for Abubakar goals. They weren't quite very slick. There was questions again about the formation. They used sort of a 4-5-1 again with Falcao as sort of a lone man up front with Diakabe occasionally linking up with him. But does he suit better being partnered by someone like Jovetic as he has in the last couple of weeks? Is that maybe an issue that Jardim maybe should have seen coming?
Perhaps. I think Falcao is used to playing up front on his own. He's used to playing as that lone striker. But he's into his 30s now, and obviously he's had some really significant injuries over the course of his career. And I personally still think that he's able to play that lone striker role. But perhaps it's getting to the point in his career where he can't do it as often as perhaps he or his manager would like. From Monaco's point of view, though, I kind of do think they need to be a little bit more pragmatic. It feels like that last season they could counter-punch teams really well. They were, because of the players they had, the pace they had going forward with Silva and Mbappe and Bakayoko in the team, Mendy and obviously Stevie's still there, but on coming out from fullback, they could really hit teams hard when they needed to. And it was almost like attack is the best form of defence. And their defence, although it was tested less, and it was tested less extensively and it was sort of less under pressure for a shorter amount of time, if you see what I mean. So now they can't do that counter-punch kind of move they were doing last season, and teams are inevitably coming onto it a little bit more, which means that defence is being found out. We saw how terrible Sidibe was against Nice, and that Nice game was a very sort of a bit of a marker for this game, because it felt like Nice and Porto are teams that can put Monaco under pressure. They can go and beat Dijon 4-1, that's fine, because they could still get the players to overrun those sorts of sides. But when they got teams who can exploit the space created by their more attacking style and do it more regularly, then they're going to be found out. So I have a feeling that Jardim needs to kind of think a little bit when they play bigger teams to be a little bit more pragmatic, We know we can set teams up to defend really well. Monaco, before last season, were pretty famous for defending pretty extensively. And perhaps give Fabinho a little bit more help in midfield, because without Bakayoko's mobility, it feels like he's perhaps not so him and Moutinho perhaps are not as, they're not sort of affecting the game as much as perhaps they were last season. So he might need a little bit more support, maybe go 4-3-3, play Lamar in midfield or even out wide, maybe give Tielemans a few more games and put more faith in him. So I think there's an evolution that needs to happen at Monaco. I wouldn't give up on them just yet. I have a feeling they're going to go out of this group, but like I said, I wouldn't give up on them. But I think there needs to be evolution, because they have to sort of come around to the fact that they haven't got the players they've got last year. And although that's okay in certain situations in the Champions League, I have a feeling they might be found wanting.
Yeah, the worry now is a double against Besiktas is not something you want to be facing when you.
They look good, haven't they?
Yeah, and especially that Vodafone Arena as well. Wow, what a noise they make there! That is not a place. If you're used to the maybe mild mannered form of the Stade Louis II, going there might be quite the difference in ruckus. And yeah, you make an excellent point there, Adam. Now with that double header ahead, I am worried about them. It might even be tough making the Europa League qualifying as well if RB Leipzig pull something out of the bag as well. As for the Europa League games, really, Marseille can't help but be Marseille sometimes, can they, Adam? And it was another game where frustrated, flat to deceive, and they end up losing.
Yeah, exactly. I had a feeling this game might go in this direction. I didn't feel like they were going to get the 3 points here. They sneaked that 1-0 win over Konyaspor at home, and they still, although they've kind of managed to, or at least Rudy Garcia's kind of managed to cajole his team to some slightly more stoic performances. They've grinded a few results out. They still look like a team, for me anyway, a team of individuals. I don't know what their plan is really. I feel like there isn't really a sort of a cohesive idea of the style of play. It's almost like give the ball to Payet and see what he can do, and if he can't do something, give it to Tuvan. And that again against smaller league sides, that's going to work because they've got better players. You know, if you look at their first 11, it's a very, very good first 11. But that team, that 11 players, hasn't really coalesced into an outfit yet, a proper team who sort of can interlink and work together effectively. I actually watched this game with our Austrian analyst at Football Radar, and he was saying beforehand, that Marseille are going to win this easily, aren't they? Because you look at their team, you look at their first 11, it's such a good side. And I said, I really didn't see it. I kind of felt like that, like I said, they're a team of individuals, and they very much haven't really worked out what their identity is yet. We talked a bit about the Champions Project, which is still a ridiculous title in earlier podcasts, and it feels like that's such a hollow title. It doesn't really mean anything. And the project in general, which is the word project is one I disagree with in general anyway, but the philosophy of the club is a bit soulless at the moment, which is odd for Marseille because they're such a grand old club and such a huge team. For me, the biggest in France traditionally, and it just feels like that there's no impetus. And that the team is just a collection of recently signed players who have either yet to gel or have struggled to gel over the last year or 18 months. And that really comes through in these sorts of games where Salzburg are a good young side. They've scored some wonderful team goals this year. If you get the chance to check them out sort of on YouTube and Twitter, they crop up occasionally. So they're the kind of type of team that cause Marseille problems. And I just felt like it was inevitable, as you said, Nathan, that Marseille would be Marseille, not really be able to sort of will a goal into existence and perhaps, lose on the odd goal, which is what happened in the end. And Manas de Boer, who is a bit up and down as a forward, was very good in Switzerland, but hasn't been great in Austria. Should have scored another time as well. So perhaps it could have been worse for Marseille. And I think Garcia's got to look at his team and not necessarily go out and sign players, but he's got to start moulding this team into a team, and it's not one at the moment.
Yeah, I suppose the positive for them is that group's still pretty close, and all those games following are still winnable as well. Tom, on the other side of that coin, Nice have been excellent so far in this Europa League campaign, and they got another strong win with a 3-0 victory against Vitesse. 2 goals from Alisson Player, which is nice to see, and mixing that with Mario Balotelli scoring goals in the league recently, Alain Saint-Maximin chipping in every so often. Focusing on the main one, obviously they were in Player with the double tonight. Is that something really for Nice to build on now? Is they're finally starting to be having an attacking impetus and scoring goals on the regular?
Absolutely. I remember the last time I was on here, I think I was quite critical of Nice because they didn't look as threatening as maybe they should have on paper. They have the players that you look at and go, they should be doing well, but in practice they just weren't as clinical or as attacking creatively as they should have been. But today's game and some performances recently in and around this game have kind of shown that they're growing together, and players coming back. And it's always nice when he scores because he's a personal favourite of mine. I really enjoy watching him. Balotelli's looking a little bit more involved, and when he gets involved, things for Nice happen. He's a very creative player without doing much in the sense of running and hassling in that regard. And Alan Saint-Maximin, who he's always had the potential to be really dangerous, and I've always felt that if he's on form and if he's producing well, then the team around him does well. But the problem was, and I found that last season with him, it was trying to get the performance out of him and trying to get the end product out. As for now, he seems to be adding the end product to it, and as a whole, Nice's attacking unit seem to be doing very well, as today's game showed.
Yeah, what I love about Saint-Maximin now is he seems to be playing with a smile on his face for the first time in a long time, really. He always seems like a angry little individual sometimes when he was at Bastia and previous, but he does seem to be finally enjoying his football now. He's playing regularly. And the other team that played this evening on the later kickoff was Lyon, who drew 1-1 at Atalanta, and I was on watching duty on that game, and it was exactly kind of what you expect from Lyon at home so far this season. I think Atalanta did a very good job of making it hard, especially in those midfield areas where Fekir is playing, where Diaz tends to drop into. There was probably 5 or 6 players in that central area at all times for them this evening, and it made it very tough for Lyon to break them down. And that a little bit of ingenuity from Fekir down the left got them the goal. It's probably just deserved on the balance of play in that first half, although Atalanta had a very, very good chance in the first half as well, header at the back post. And then Lyon do what they always seem to do, which is when they get the lead in games, they sort of think, okay, we can handle that now, and they allow them back into the game. It's not the greatest challenge for Tete for the free kick that Gomez scores. It's a frustrating one again as well because it's a close free kick. It goes into the bottom corner around the wall. I always think a goalkeeper should be doing better there, or they should be more well advised that it's slightly wider out to the left. Maybe have a 2-man wall so you can see more of the ball, because you can't. It seems like Juan Lopez should be saving, and he doesn't even dive at all, really, to be fair. He does seem a little bit too far over to his left. It's a frustrating one. And again, after that, Lyon try and do something. Again, they never really seem to make anything happen. I'm starting to worry a little bit more about that front four as well, and we'll probably talk a little bit about them later. But I just feel like they're not quite clicking as much as I thought they would. We thought they were great when they were all gung-ho at the start of the season, but Depay's dropped out because he keeps losing the ball and he's not got any ingenuity. Traore seems to dip in and out of games. Diaz is slowing down a little bit. Fekir is struggling to really influence games as much as he has in the past. And it's frustrating. And it's another frustrating draw. They'll again be happy that the news in Everton that there was a draw with Apollon and Limassol, which keeps this group wide open. But those 2 games against Everton are critical for if they want to qualify now. Let's go on to our Ligue 1 games, at least this week now, that Europe is in our review mirror. And we start with Paris Saint-Germain, who will be hosting Bordeaux in a pretty tantalising affair that's happening on Saturday, Tom. Let's talk about the hosts first. They need a strong performance in this one after their draw against Montpellier last week.
I think they do. I think the draw last week was surprising because these are the type of teams, with all due respect to Montpellier, that they should be putting away with ease. So you look at that performance and you think, oh, maybe there's a way to get to not lose against PSG. Coming up against a good Bordeaux side who are on a good run. They're playing really well at the moment, and they've got one of the best players, in my opinion, in the league, in Malcolm, on going forward. But I think to make a real statement following the Champions League and to kind of show, look, they mean business, both domestically and in Europe, they need a comprehensive and a strong win. It's okay winning 1-0 or 2-0 against a good opposition, but to prove that they've got, a power to overwork and overrun and essentially overpower some of the better teams in the league, they need to. It's not good for the competition, of course, but they need to demolish these sides. They need to, really go for it if they want to keep people entertaining them in a way. So I think yes, they do need a big win, but it's going to be a lot harder than I think people might give it. No one expects really Bordeaux to go there and get all 3 points, but they're going to give them a hell of a game.
And I'm really looking forward to this one, really, Adam. And Bordeaux are on a terrific run of late. We talked about them on the main show, having been unbeaten so far this season, but I did have a quick look back, and they've not lost in Ligue 1 for 13 games.
Wow.
Is this probably where it ends, though?
Yeah, I think it is. Bordeaux have sort of, at least as far as I've been covering the league, struggled against PSG. They'd always put some good form together, and PSG would turn up and give them a good thrashing. I seem to remember a cup game where they very easily won for 4-0 at Bordeaux last year. But even if it does come to an end, I don't think it's too much of an issue for Bordeaux's season overall, because they're third at the moment, which is great, and they can genuinely challenge for that third Champions League spot if they can keep everybody fit and they can keep playing the way that Jocelyn Gourvenec has sort of got them playing, which is a good achievement considering how they sort of very up and down last year, and he sort of switched between 4-4-2 and 4-3-3. Jerry Menez was in the team and in and out the team and in terrible form, and there are sort of lots of factors that weren't really going in Jocelyn Gourvenec's favour. So I think it's an underrated achievement to the standard of which he's got Bordeaux playing. He's made some really nice signings, as we mentioned. I think Depravre was a favourite of yours and mine, Nathan. I think he's going to be a great player for them this season. 15 league goals for Lille last year. It's incredible that Lille let him go. Apparently they told him the club needed the money to sell him, which is bizarre. Jonathan Caffrey is a good signing from Ludogorets as well, Champions League experience. Octavio's come in and done well. Lucas Laraga in midfield alongside him has done very well from Zuta Waregem. Younes Nkari's been in great form. So although I still think PSG are going to be too strong for them, this Bordeaux team are better equipped in general to challenge the traditional sort of top 3 or 4 sides in the league. And there is an argument here that says that Bordeaux can get something tomorrow, given the way that Malcolm's playing, given the way that Kamano, Depravre, or Cafu can really put some performances together, and they've got a lot of talent and ability between the 4 of them, and they're relatively solid defensively as well. So I think this is probably their sort of best shot at getting some points from PSG, since I think a 2-2 draw when Kevin Trapp made two pretty terrible mistakes, and Henri Saive may have got sent off in that game as well. Sort of maybe 3 years ago, they got a lucky 2-2 draw at Parc des Princes. But since then, I think this is probably their best opportunity to get some points in Paris. I don't think they will, but this team's well equipped to go far in Ligue 1 this season, no matter the result on Saturday afternoon.
Let's get some predictions in this one, and I'll start with you, Adam.
I'm going to say PSG 3-1.
Tom?
I'm going to go PSG 3-0 on this one.
Yeah, I'm maybe going to be a little bit harsh, but I am still a little bit worried about that Bordeaux defence. They've been okay recently, but they've shown flashes of it being not excellent. And against a very, very dynamic attack, I'm thinking it might be even worse than they fear. I'm going for 5-0 PSG, and it seems a little bit harsh from Bordeaux, but I really worry about that defence. Again, yeah, especially against the attack they're facing as well. And
yeah.
Moving on to Sunday, the first game on Sunday, and that will be Troyes hosting Saint-Etienne. And Tom, the away side showed their ability by coming from behind twice against Rennes in their 2-2 draw last Sunday. Have they got enough to be in the conversation for the Champions League places this season?
I think in the conversation is their limit at the moment. I don't think they're quite there where they can, actually be considered genuine candidates to knock out one of the one of the teams that I'd consider better than them, but they're certainly in with a shout of challenging. I don't think they'll get it, but as you said, I think they're in the conversation for at least European football. And, they're showing resilience. They're not playing bad. However, the other teams around them, I think, just have that little bit more, and they might just have a little bit more to push them over the edge. However, like you said, they're finding ways to, not lose, which is the fundamental of this game. Don't lose. Trying to win, obviously, but they're playing well in the regards that they're not losing. So if that's the biggest compliment I can give them, so I don't know. But I think they're in the conversation. I think they deserve to be mentioned at least a little bit. Maybe not as much as some of the others, but they've got to get their name in there somewhere. But if they go on a good run, if they win games like this, which I think they should, and I think they will, if they keep winning games like this and pick up points where they need to, then I think maybe they might be dark horses for it. You never know.
I was actually quite impressed by that comeback against Rennes, because Rennes have been decent in the last couple of weeks, and getting those kind of results can be important for pushing for those Euro places. But they face a Troyes side, Adam, that have at least been better than last time we saw them when they were in Ligue 1. But goals are still an issue.
They are an issue, and I think that it's. I think they deserve a lot of credit, though. There are a lot of sides at the bottom of the table that struggle to score goals, and we talked about Strasbourg on the pod last week being a key example. Metz are going to struggle to score goals without Sheikh Diabate, and that relegation fight is this season and for many seasons is characterised in Ligue by a lack of inability to score goals. But I think that Troyes have qualities in other areas that has sort of shown through in the last. Well, since they've been promoted, you're absolutely right that it's far better than it was than the last time they were up in Ligue 2 seasons ago, when they were an absolute shambles, and it was a bit of a nightmare season for them. The win over Metz last weekend was absolutely huge. I actually watched that game this morning, caught up with it this morning, and it was a game they didn't deserve to win. I thought Renaud Carrad played pretty well for Metz, and they had more opportunities. Mathieu Deserry should have scored, but I have been and was very impressed with Sam Grandsir, who scored the winning goal, and he's been very, very. He's a very little wash-fish sort of player who buzzes in and out. He's very, very quick, quite stocky, quite powerful in his own way, and he's looked a real danger for them. And I was really impressed with his performance. So perhaps there's a revenue of goal scoring there, perhaps going later into the season. He looked very, very good. Nice and sort of confident finish to take the 3 points late in the game. But that shows that win shows that they have the character this time around to win games like this against sides that they're going to be battling against, the drop against, if you like. Without Benjamin Nive, without Stéphane Darbion, who for me are two of their better players. Viz Carondo is the most experienced defender, was absent too last week, and they were still able to win. Okay, Metz are pretty poor. I'm fairly certain that Metz might finish bottom this season, but even so, 3 points on the road in Ligue 1 is nothing to be sniffed at. And they after the sending off to it was a little bit lucky, but after sending off, they can really sort of take pride in the fact that they held on, they defended well, and they look like a team who can compete this year. Whereas as last time they were in the league, they were very much out of their depth. No fault of their own. It was sort of through financial issues. They couldn't really sort of improve upon the squad that won Ligue 2 the season before. But this year they look like a team that will fight. And for a promoted team that's had some terrible league experiences in the past, as I said, that's half the battle. Whether they can score goals, as you said, Nathan, is still open to debate. But hopefully Grandsir will get a few. And Darminian's got something about him. Okay, he's only got one or two, I think, so far this year. But in Ligue 1, it's a very difficult league to score goals in. And if Grandsir and Nian get, 15, 18 between them this season, that would be pretty decent for a promoted side, and it might be enough to keep them up. So I'm so happy to see them doing relatively well and have some character and be a competitive team in this league. And it'll be interesting to see how they get on for the rest of the year. Hopefully they'll get Nive and Darbion back relatively soon, and they'll be able to kick on.
Yeah, it's good that they're not going to be really the embarrassment they were last time, at least. Let's get some predictions, and I'll start with you, Tom.
I think Saint-Etienne will win 2-0 this weekend.
I'm going to go for the 3-0 win for Saint-Etienne on this one. Troyes' lack of goals worry me against a decent Saint-Etienne defence, and this is the ideal game for them to get back to those more interesting, exciting ways under Oscar Garcia, at least. Adam?
1-0 Saint-Etienne for me.
Classic Saint-Etienne score. I
Yeah,
like
it is.
it. Well, another game on Sunday sees Angers take on Lyon. And Adam, we've praised Angers quite a bit this season, but I was just looking back at their fixtures so far, and they've drawn 5 of their open 7 fixtures. Admittedly, these do include results at Nice, at Marseille, at Saint-Etienne, and against Bordeaux. So they are good sides as well. But there are also examples that they really raise their game against these kind of sides. So is it this game against Lyon likely to bring the best out of them?
Yeah, I think it is. It's an interesting point you make that they've sort of played 7 games, drawn 5, only won once. And Angers are a funny team. They're one of my, as I repeatedly say on the pod, they're one of my favourite teams in the league. And they have a tendency to play to the level of their opponents a little bit. So they'll play against the bigger teams. And you mentioned those draws against some of the top sides, and they'll play fantastically in those games, and they'll keep the ball brilliantly well. They'll really compete with supposedly a better side, and some players like Thomas Mangani really stand out in those sorts of games. But then they come against teams, perhaps especially at home, against teams who should be below them in the table. You see Angers as a lower mid-table side, and then you look like the game against Metz 2 weeks ago. Now they're in the position where they're the stronger side. They're expected to dominate and they're expected to break a team down, and they struggle with that sort of scenario, if you like. And they could not break Metz down at all. Metz defended pretty well, snatched the goal, and there was little Angers could do about it. And that's a common occurrence. I seem to have them dropping some silly points at home to Lorient last year when they were fighting at the bottom over the winter. There were some silly results like that. But then they'll go and draw 0-0 with PSG. It's an odd state of affairs that they sort of got themselves into, the way that Moulin sets his teams up. I still think they'll be absolutely fine this season, and I think this game against Lyon is a classic Angers game where they can really get into one of the bigger teams. They can come to the Stade Raymond Coppa, which is quite a nice little stadium. It's quite compact. Their fans are pretty good. They're sort of quite on top of you, and they'll really get in amongst Lyon and really upset them. And it'll be a game that Stéphane Moulin and his players will relish, and it suits them as well because they're quite a physical team. They like to get into the Lyon midfield and set up. They like to score goals from set pieces. Mangani and Santamaria and perhaps Koulibaly, if he plays, will keep the ball relatively well in midfield and keep sort of Lyon at bay, and it suits their style. So I think this game is perfect for Angers. They just need to figure out how to beat the weaker sides. Once they do that, they'll be a top half side. But I don't know how they can go about doing that. They have such a small budget that it's going to be difficult to find players that are going to have the guile to break sides down that sit in against them. But even so, they're a team I really like, and this is a game that suits them. So it should be an interesting game on Sunday.
Yeah, it'd be important for them to really learn that, I think, for the rest of the season. That might really stop them from pushing on from Europe, where they could be, if they could beat those weaker sides more convincingly. Tom, Lyon were entertaining last week, as they usually are, but again, they conceded 3 for the second time this season. Is there still concerns about their defence despite their entertaining attack?
I think not has to be, but I think there's something that you have to look at and go, there's something not quite right with that defence. And I was just going through the squad of Lyon, just as Adam was talking there, and it's a weird defence. To me it is anyway, because you've got, I think it was Morel played centre-back last night, and I'm not fully convinced on him being is he really the best centre-back they've got to play? Maybe that's just me. But I look at that defence on paper and it doesn't exactly fill me with confidence. They conceded 3 last week at home to Dijon. That's alarm bells as it is. They did get praised the week before with their performance against PSG. Yes, they lost 2-0, but it was relatively defensively stable up until a certain point, especially Kenny Tete. He got all the plaudits for how he dealt with Neymar. But as Adam was saying, this is a game that Angers will look at, and they might think they can sneak something here, because if they keep that Lyon attack quiet, which at the moment, as tonight showed against Atalanta, they can be stopped if you're well drilled and if you set up the right way against them. But they'll look at this game and they'll think they might be able to get something, because that defence can be got at. It can be attacked and it can be vulnerable at times, as last week showed. And sometimes when you look at teams and go, "Oh, what's the defensive frailties?" Sometimes they've not shown any defensive frailties. It just looks bad on paper. Whereas this Lyon team, they've shown defensive frailties, especially last week. And as good as they are going forward, and as entertaining as they are, and as exciting as we may find them to watch them, especially certain players like Fekir and Mariano, defensively they're suspect. And I think it is a concern, especially going into this game. And they need to figure something out, because if Angers sit deep and if they prevent them scoring, and if they nick one on the counter, that's an interesting game, because it can certainly happen, and it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Angers come out with this with all 3 points.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. The one thing that's struck me really about Lyon so far this season, defensively at least, is how is Mukhtar Diakhaby not getting a game? I don't know what might have happened. I know we had a little bit of a niggle at the start of the season, but he's not been that disappointing, and he is one of their more exciting young defenders. And thinking back to the fact that they lost Mamana so easily as well in the summer to Zenit, it does seem strange for Genesio to be consistently leaving him out. And Morel's had a decent start to the season, and all honesty, he's probably earned that new contract, but it's astounding to me that he's not getting the game time, given how much potential he has and how good he was last season. Let's get some predictions, and I'll start this one. And I'm going to go for a 2-1 win for Angers. I think they might nick this. If Moulin's watched this evening and he packs that midfield, Lyon look really, really difficult to break down teams that have sat in front of them and occupying that space where all their attackers like to be. They've really, really struggled this evening to score. Probably a little bit lucky to grab one themselves. What do you think, Adam?
A draw. I'm going to say 1-1.
Tom?
I'm going to have to second that. I think it'll be a 1-1.
Right, on to the final game that's on Sunday evening, and that's between Nice and Marseille. Interesting tie, definitely. And that's, Tom, Nice's recent recovery somewhat stalled against Angers, although obviously they've rebounded a bit this evening. Was that result on Friday last week a momentary blip, or in what has been an excellent September with 4 wins out of 5 in all competitions?
I think it was a blip, because if they'd gone on tonight and if they struggled against the Vitesse side that we'd expect them to beat, if they'd have gone on tonight and if they'd have dropped points and if they got a draw, then I think we'd have a different conversation here of whether there's another problem at Nice. But they bounced back very well and they looked very good going forward and they looked very dangerous. And as we know, when Marseille play teams in the south just like they are, goals come. Goals are afoot on this one. I think what they missed last week was a central midfielder by the name of Jean-Michel Seri, because he wasn't part of it, and they looked a little bit lost. They didn't look as strong as they normally do, and I think when he plays, there's a different level to him, because he really does add a different dimension in every aspect. And it was like we were mentioning earlier that Alain Saint-Maximin, when he's on form, the team plays a certain way. When he plays with a smile on his face and when he's happy, the team attackingly goes forward. But when Seri is on form and when he is in the mood, the whole team is completely different. So if he's on form, then I think Nice are in for a good year. As for this game this weekend, I think they're coming up, with all due respect to Marseille, they're coming up against an opposition that I think they should beat. They're not Marseille. We mentioned it earlier. They've got this, the finger quotes were up in the air here, project that they've got going on, but no one seems to know what's going on there. So I think Nice might look at this and, if they attack them with pace and if they're direct with them, like they were tonight and like they were, a few weeks ago, if they attack them with pace and they're direct and they get in behind a rather slow Marseille defence, I think they're in for a really good evening.
Adam, things looked up for Marseille in the last couple of weeks, a couple of decent wins, but after the result tonight and the ones before, does it feel like those comfortable results against Amiens, and especially it's that inept Real Toulouse side on last Sunday, make them flattered to deceive a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely think that those sort of 2 wins through and one against Konyaspor as well. Those sort of 3 in a row now, excluding tonight, of course. They were crucial sort of milestones for Marseille, but only because they needed the points. They needed to steady the ship. And after the results against the 3-1 loss at home to Rennes, which should have been much more than the scoreline suggests, and they were completely outplayed in that game, and of course the 6-1 thrashing at Monaco. As I said at the beginning of the pod, they look like a collection of individuals rather than a team, and it's really interesting to see how Garcia goes about moulding this team into a team. I think perhaps some tough decisions are going to have to be made. We were talking about previously. Tom mentioned about how slow their defence is, and that's definitely true. I think Patrice Evra is perhaps as disappointed I am to say it. I think he's way past his best, and he's looked off the pace by quite some distance this season. And I think that I've sort of mentioned the pod, perhaps using him at centre back, or perhaps using him in a 3 at centre back, which is an option. I think it's time that Amavi was made first choice left back, and Evra can continue his Monday Twitter cheerleading role and be. He's a very experienced player, and he's great around for the team and off the pitch. But I think perhaps he should be marginalised a little bit in terms of the first 11, and Amavi should be given that position. Whether Abdenor can come back from injury after a terrible first game against Rennes is open to debate, and perhaps they need to be looking to youth, and perhaps they need to be looking at whether they need to be looking at the younger players around the league rather than going for this sort of big names, sort of retirement home for former French internationals and other big league and players like Abdenor, who was pretty terrible at Valencia. And then you look at the midfield, and it's really a real shame to see Maxime Lopez has been sort of marginalised in the last sort of month or so. Was left out completely of the game last weekend and didn't get any minutes of the games either side of that. And I think he's the one type of player that they should really invest in. Only 20 years old, a great little player, got a great vision, a good range of passing, and is a good partner for Luis Gustavo in that midfield. Zambo Anguissa is 21. He's a very bullish, got a very mobile defensive or centre midfield player. Perhaps he's the type of players that they should be focusing on, rather than players like Gregory Sertic, who at only 28 looks a lot older than 28 and has been caught out 1 or 2 times this season. And sort of players that they sort of collect from with bigger names. I think they should be looking towards what would make the most effective team, rather than trying to cram all their bigger name players into a starting 11. Metropolis is a good signing. He was good at Benfica, despite what Fulham fans may remember of him. And I think he'll score goals in Ligue. But it's still, how do they fit? How do they fit their players into that team, and how do they get the best out of the players like Maxime Lopez and Zambo if they're going to play them? So it's a difficult formula for Garcia, and it's a difficult thing for him to pitch correctly. But that's his job as the manager, and that'll be telling this season if he can work out how to get the best out of this squad and put faith in some of those younger players to complement some of their better players. That could be the difference between 3rd and 7th, and that's going to be his challenge for the rest of the year. And it starts with games like this. A game, all right, Nice are perhaps not as big a club as them, but they're on par and probably above them in terms of quality at the moment. And they're going to want to challenge for that 3rd Champions League place. And I know that Garcia's sort of been given the route to improve on 5th last season. This is a game they're going to be getting kind of type again, need to get points from. And it'd be interesting to see how he sets up, bearing in mind they're playing like a bigger side, or more, or at least a better one. So difficult times for Marseille, I think, at the moment. Marseille by those sort of run of sort of comfortable wins against sort of lower teams like Amiens, and Toulouse away from home are pretty poor. But we'll have to see how it goes at the weekend. But I think he's got a lot of work to do, Garcia. And I'm sort of thinking at the moment, if it comes to this stage next season and they're doing the same thing, will he still be their manager? I don't think he will. So interesting times ahead at Marseille, and I think they're going to have to find a team out of that collective individuals sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of players there. I feel sorry for Sertic. I think injuries have absolutely annihilated him, I think, unfortunately. And you can't leave Patrice Evra out. Don't you know how much he loves this game? He tells us every week. Let's get some final predictions on this one then. I'll start with you, Adam.
I'm going to say 2-0 Nice.
Tom?
I want to go for a little bit more exciting and say Nice 3, Marseille 2.
I'm going to stick my neck out on this one and say Nice win 3-0, and the ire of the Marseille fans sees Rudy Garcia binned.
Oh, interesting.
He's been so unconvincing to start the season, and the Marseille fans are very famous for being a little impatient, shall we say, and I think that might just get Frank McCourt to think, well, let's try something different. We might try something different in the summer transfer-wise, so let's get someone in to start something with the younger players maybe, so keep as much of the experienced ones that are working at least anyway, and start afresh of this Champions project, air quotes. That's all that we have for this evening. My thanks to Adam, Tom, and all of you lovely listeners. There'll be no preview show next week because of the international break, but do join us for the main show on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.